Welcome to Better Humans at Work. On this week's episode of Better Humans at Work, I have the pleasure of talking with Marie Deveaux, a third-generation entrepreneur, a lifelong wealth, and a perpetual dream chaser. Marie has worked in training, personal development, and education for over 10 years, and her passion is helping others find their wave and then exceed their own expectations. Marie and I met before we actually met. So I used to work at a learning and development company called Mind Gym, and Marie was one of our expert coaches that will go and deliver Mind Gym's content in different organizations. And so when I was first onboarding at Mind Gym, I observed a random person giving a session in New York City where Mind Gym was based, and lo and behold, it was Marie. And I remember her energy, I remember her authenticity, and I also remember her ability to really make these connections in what would otherwise be kind of a staunchy, corporate environment setting. About a year after that, a mutual friend connected us, and she told me all about her experience working with Udemy and producing really high quality professional content. Hers was about management, how to be a better manager, and I then through her connections ended up doing my virtual course through Udemy on Allyship called Ally Up. And so we share that, and I want to make sure to include the links to both our courses in the comments because they are awesome. Of course, I'm biased. But Marie, she's had a phenomenal career running her company High Tides Consulting. So she's incorporated 3 businesses over the course of her life so far, and her current business, High Tides Consulting, provides coaching and consulting services to entrepreneurs, leaders, and teams. Marie's led over 24 leadership workshops and communication workshops, some really cool finance, tech, and nonprofit firms. And then Marie's individually coached over 120 executives from overcoming various barriers to their success. She's created leadership training programs for first-time managers, and she's a fellow working mama as myself, or I like to call Mamapreneur, and she lives in New York City with her husband and their 2 awesome kids. So without further ado, here is Marie Deveaux. Hi, Marie. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a good time. I'm pretty sure we're going to have a good time.
I agree. So we're about 6 hours apart. Marie's up in New York. How is New York? How's New York living? With everything happening with the pandemic, and I'm sure it's a very different city.
It is a very different city. I'm actually kind of enjoying the seclusion of it a little bit. I'm in Brooklyn, so not in so much of the mayhem in Manhattan. And it's actually funny, even getting ready this weekend to go away and go upstate and be around fewer people, just because that's the safe way to hang out. So, but New York is still here, trying to do what it does.
Yeah. Well, thank you again for joining me today. I love the work that you do. I'm just so excited to share it with our viewers. And so let's just get right into it. But what is your professional experience with improving the human experience at work?
Yeah, so my work really focuses on women and minorities and their relationship to work. And so I do that in 2 main arenas. I think the first one is really with one-on-one coaching. The majority of my private clients are women, largely women of color, who are experiencing some type of friction with their relationship with work. So that could be women who are in leadership positions and are hitting up against a ceiling or some type of limitations in terms of their upward mobility and advancement. Or that could be women who are experiencing that same thing and saying, I don't think this is the kind of container I want for my work anymore. And so I tend to support women in leadership positions who are actually transitioning out of the corporate American work experience and looking for more an entrepreneurial pursuit or experience. The other arena that I work in then is with corporations and organizations who are often realizing that their workplace is not as inclusive as it is. And so I tend to work with those organizations, helping them foster more inclusive work culture, really examining the company values and finding where what they say is no longer in alignment with how they're showing up as an organization. And so it's interesting. I always tell people I tend to tackle the problem from both ends, both for the organizations who are experiencing essentially an extreme brain drain when it comes to diversity talent, and how do they stop up that gap, but then also with those people who are this high performing talent who are suddenly experiencing that their work environment is no longer supportive of who they are.
I love that. It reminds me of that phrase of it's not you, it's me. It's you and it's me. We gotta get it from both. It's me and it's you. And we need to tackle it from both ways if we're going to make any sort of progress and see, change as a result. I love that.
Well, it's very true, right? It is you, it is me, it's all of it, right? How do we change work? And it's interesting because when we're talking about work, I have to constantly be reminding people that we're talking about a relationship, right? It's not one-sided. It is and requires both parties to do some of the lifting. Otherwise, we just end up again in something that's imbalanced and where someone else is doing most of the carrying. And that's not what we want when we talk about an equitable workplace.
I love that. And the way we talk about allyship over at Mattingly Solutions is like this ongoing relationship between an ally and a partner. Because we don't want allies going in and saving the day and then doing the wrong stuff, but also, we don't want partners to just only put that, on the ally, and the ally doesn't know what to do. And it needs to be this ongoing, authentic relationship. And I love applying that to like the organizational space too. That's amazing. Do you have any case studies or examples that you'd be willing to share about a time when your work resulted in some sort of improvement in employee or leader outcomes? So things like well-being, job satisfaction, engagement, retention, but any case studies you're willing to share with our audience?
Yeah. So I think one of my favorite clients I'll share one of each. One of my favorite private clients, we'll call her Jay, was really struggling with how she was showing up at work. She had received feedback that she was too loud, too gregarious, if that's even a thing. And so was really having a hard time finding her authentic voice. And we did a lot of work in preparing her for some of her very public facing speaking engagements and helping her really refine what she wanted her voice to be and actually own it. And I think one of the most gratifying experiences was she went to a large, kind of town hall type of event, and all of the leaders were up on stage, and they asked each of them one by one to introduce themselves. And she was so excited because she said, everyone goes up and they say the same thing. Hi, I'm so and so. I work at such and such department, right? Very, very bland and unremarkable. And it came her turn, and she got up and she told them, I'm going to take you on a journey. She had this beautiful opening expressing her passion and really leading with heart. And she said, it's interesting because people still come up to her years later and remark about how memorable that experience was for them being in the audience and seeing like, wow, this is a leader who leads with heart. And even recently she had one of her employees interviewed because she's being honored for a piece, for her leadership. And they said, describe her leadership style. And they're like, oh, Jay leads with love. That's her leadership style. And so being able to be a part of that experience for her, to see someone who was really afraid to be who they are in the workplace and then actually turn that into a superpower, and then watching as she actually then becomes a role model for others, is kind of the magic of this work, right? Where people can feel empowered, not hide any part of themselves,
Because such a huge part about the work we do in these diversity, equity, inclusion spaces, for a while, was bring your whole self to work, right? I think we can all agree that probably never. I don't want anyone to bring their whole selves to work. I like that I have parts that are at home and then I bring to work. But how do we bring our authentic selves to work? How do we bring our best selves to work? Like, how do we feel like we can be who we truly want to be in our professional world? And so I feel like that is like one of these higher, almost like abstract goals at work. So to have like an example of what that looks like in action, as you said, turning something that maybe wasn't viewed as a strength and then into her superpower, that's just amazing. But you said you had a little more to share.
Oh, yes. So the other I'll share, this is now on the organizational side. And this was in the spring of 2020, so shortly after the murder of George Floyd and all of the upheaval that came with that. And this particular organization really wanted to do something to connect the conversation that was happening within their Black community with the conversation that was happening with leadership. And so they just recognized there was a huge disconnect. And so what we did was we created a series of panel conversations or facilitated dialogues where we went in with, and of course, this is me in collaboration with their leaders of talent and working with membership from their ERG to identify who the speakers and representatives from their Black community would be for this conversation. But we created a panel discussion. And so we did a panel conversation that highlighted the voices of their Black employees and really gave them a platform to express some of the concerns they had in their industry, at the organization, some of those pain points and what their experience was like, especially in the midst of the pandemic, working virtually, and now with that additional layer of the upheaval that many have now come to call, the racial reckoning in the United States at the time. And so we created that conversation. It went extremely well, showcasing the Black employee voices. And then as a follow-up, we then had a facilitated discussion with members of leadership who had the opportunity to listen into that conversation and then respond and fully acknowledge what their Black employees were experiencing. And anytime we do a facilitated dialogue, I think the most important part is some of the preparatory work that goes into those dialogues, because that's when you're actually in the room with those folks and helping them explore their ideas and understand truly what their thoughts are around some of these ideas and some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And so in this way, we just created space for folks to really grapple with some of the ideas and challenges they're having, but create a dialogue that wasn't happening before. And it's funny because even after those two sets of panels, you get, and it's interesting now in the world of Zoom, we're on Zoom all together and you're kind of with people, kind of not. But as soon as the session ends, the emails that come in and people, especially from the Black employee side, were saying, wow, I can't believe that just happened. I just was on a panel with over 1,000 people expressing to my company how I feel as a Black individual here. And that is unheard of. And so really giving people the space to feel like they could be heard and seen in their workspace in the fullness of their identity was really empowering. And we've continued to watch as that conversation has continued to evolve for that particular organization.
Oh, what an amazing example. I'm curious because I feel like right now we're trying to strike the balance. And by we, I mean like those who are doing diversity, equity, inclusion work, but how did you pull off striking this balance of giving the Black employees in this organization the voice and the ability to feel seen and heard without burdening them with that responsibility of having to do additional emotional labor for the benefit of others?
Yeah. Oh, Victoria, I love that you raised that, right? Like this idea of the emotional labor involved. And so again, going back to this idea of there has to be shared responsibility in these conversations, a lot of the work that we did prepping the Black employees for the panel conversation was asking them those questions. And even one of the questions that we asked publicly for the panel was, how do you feel now that so many of your non-Black allies, peers, friends are now asking you what to do? What can we do? And so they had a chance to actually express what the experience was like for them, having lived in their bodies their entire life and now only getting some of that recognition now. And it was something that I think was one, very affirming for the other people who identified as Black who were listening, but also really eye-opening for those who don't identify that way to really start thinking about how they're approaching what a solution could be. And I say solution with trepidation, right? Because we all know when we're talking about race, gender, any of these points of difference where we bring up conversations around equity, the solution isn't going to be quick and fast. It's not going to be simple. And so those were some of the dialogues and really some of the challenges that we wanted to highlight in these conversations, that what we're dealing with is not easy. It's not going to be fast. It's definitely not going to be clean. And oftentimes in this work, we're reminding people that this work is messy and we have to be okay with that.
I always say if it doesn't feel messy or complicated or awkward, then we're not doing it right. We're not having the conversations and we're not doing the work that lead to that sustained change and transformation. Because you're absolutely right, it takes time and we need to be in it for the long haul. Speaking of being in it for the long haul, so you mentioned collaboration, you mentioned relationships, and then partnerships, right? And recently, our two companies have started a formal partnership together. And can you just share a little about the importance of partnerships in the diversity, equity, inclusion space, and how, I mean, I'm biased because this is the industry that I work in, but I feel like we're even more partnership like oriented and more sharing and collaboration in this world than I feel like in other lines of business. So can you share a little bit about why you think partnerships are so important to this line of work?
Yes. So again, I think this is really important, right? Thinking about partnership, but also thinking about the breadth of what we're talking about whenever we're in a conversation about inclusion. And I find working one-on-one with clients, working with corporations, you have to constantly remind people which conversation we're in, right? So oftentimes we go into this work, and especially in this last year, 2020, going into 2021, a lot of the focus when we're talking about DEI or DEIB has been on race. And those of us who are in the work know that is only one point of difference or one identity that we could be exploring when we're talking about diversity. So just remembering diversity is not narrow, it's actually extremely broad. Now, for me, myself, right, I identify as a Black woman, I identify as heterosexual, cisgendered, okay? So when I go into these conversations, I know the content that I'm most comfortable delivering when it comes to facilitated workshops or dialogues is going to be around race and gender. If someone comes to me and says, oh my gosh, we would love someone to help facilitate a conversation with our LGBTQIA plus community, I need to be able to point them to a partner or someone else in the field who can bring that knowledge, that expertise. Because I fully own and understand this is a very big conversation. And those of us who are in this work have often gotten very good about our particular area of expertise. And that goes both with the areas of difference that we feel most comfortable facilitating and guiding conversations in, but also in terms of the part of the interventions and solutions that we provide. So for me, myself, right, the interventions that I'm really great at are coaching, facilitated dialogue, and workshop facilitation. Okay. Areas that are not in my wheelhouse would be data analysis and assessment, for example, right? And so that is, again, why I seek out partnerships. That's why Mattingly Solutions and I are connected, is because I can bring some great facilitation, but when folks want to measure and put data behind the conversations and the change they're seeing, I knew it was in my best interest to reach out to a partner who had expertise in looking at those types of solutions and managing data around that. And so again, I think, yes, it's definitely more prevalent in our industry, but I think that's to the credit of the nature of the work, like recognizing how big this conversation is, and it's not meant for any one person to hold by themselves. So it's kind of beautiful in that way that even in this industry, we're actually modeling what the rest of the world can look like, right? Yeah, it's about relationship, it's about connection, it's about feeding off of each other's strengths to create a more complete whole versus one person doing all of the lifting themselves.
And that point about one person in any industry, let alone diversity, equity, inclusion, but one person can't do it all by themselves and shouldn't do it all by themselves. And I feel like there's this key distinction I've been helping my clients and other people I talk to see, which is an individual is not diverse. We are multifaceted, we are intersectional, but one individual is just one person, and only groups can be diverse, right? And so I know over the last year, like I've struggled with, okay, what's my role in this space as a white person, right? Do I even have a place doing DEI work right now when the conversation is so focused on anti-racism? And I really, toned myself down, and I'm not going after speaking contracts or that front end. I'm the back end person with the data and the analysis and the constructs and the science, which I love, right? But if I finally come to the conclusion that this idea of what of an ideal DEI practitioner, it's actually it's a falsity, because we're going to be the best and provide the best solutions for all those types of differences, all those different areas of diversity, by working together and having it be more than just one. And so I think that, as you said, it's beautiful, and to be able to do these partnerships and do these works in collaboration with others, I feel like that's the way we're going to have the biggest impact versus being, solopreneurs and saying, well, I know all the things, I know it all, and you don't need to bring in anyone else. Like that would be harmful.
That would be harmful. And it's amazing, this idea of, I love the, I'm a solopreneur, I'm going to do it all by myself. But part of, I think, one of the challenges for folks who first go into business, right? So now just putting on my business coach hat, but one of the biggest challenges is people actually being able to delegate and to own that they're not supposed to be expert at everything. And I think especially in this work, that's kind of our core advantage, is recognizing that the work can't be done by any one person, right?
Speaking of the work done by you, so your mission at High Tides is to magnify the voices and agency of women and minorities in corporate and entrepreneurial spaces to further the economic progress of marginalized communities. So you've already shared a little bit how you accomplish this mission and the work you do, but why should companies care about advancing the economic progress of marginalized communities? And what is the ROI of your mission, and how do you help business leaders make that connection?
Yeah. So this is really interesting, because first I'll just share, anytime companies ask me about ROI, I get a little prickly. Okay. Yeah. And that's just because when we're talking about this work, I have to remind people that we're talking about people.
Yes.
Okay. We are talking about the human experience, about how people are experiencing their life, their work. And so one of the things that I constantly have to be reminding folks is, what is their mission for their company and their organization? What are their values? Because I have yet to find an organization whose mission or vision was to make as much money as possible. So I always find it really interesting that when they're looking for vendors or looking to source folks to help them with their DI work, that their first question is, what is going to be the ROI? And so a lot of the work that I do is really helping companies find where their values and their mission is no longer aligned with their actions. Because most companies, I ask them, great, can you send me, your core values, your mission statement? Do you have any pillars that your company says you stand for? And when they send me those things, nowhere in there does it have anything about the bottom line. Nowhere in there are they talking about how much money they want to make. Instead, they're talking about things like diversity of thought. They're talking about things like collaboration. They're talking about things like how people are able to work together, teamwork. And so I always challenge them to think about what it is that truly is their goal in this work. Not to say that you can't tie any of these things back to money, but when we're talking about ROI, we're talking about how are we going to better the human experience of the people who work here. And that, of course, has returns that go, into many, many multiples. But yes, I think also adding to that, because I know, of course, your question is, well, what's the ROI of this work? Why should these companies then care about the economics of marginalized groups? And when I think about, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right, and the steps it takes for us to actually get to self-actualization as human beings, the very base of that period is our basic physiological needs. And the way that many of us go about achieving things like shelter and food are through, sustainable work and fair wages, right? We start looking at how those things are provided to us by the various resources we have around us. And the easiest way to help distribute resources is looking at economics and looking at advancement.
Yeah.
So if we truly are committed to collaboration and teamwork, that means that we also need to be committed to everyone being able to meet their full potential, to show up, to collaborate, and be a part of a team.
And so for our audience out there, Marie, what would be 3 tips or 3 pointers that you would give those who are in an organization with, on the same team as marginalized communities or people who identify as women or minority? What are 3 tips that you would have for those who want to amplify the voices and agency of women and minorities in corporate and entrepreneurial spaces?
Yeah. So first tip would be to get curious and get to know people on a personal level. And I say this because that's something we can all do, is really look at some of the personal relationships we have and how diverse those relationships are and how we're looking to expand our knowledge of people who are different from us. That's the first thing I'll say. Second, I think this goes back to being more on the employee level, right? Thinking about sponsorship and what that means for you and what that could look like. And this is, I think these are also, they can kind of build off of each other, because if you have genuine relationships with people who are different than you, it makes it much easier for you to advocate for those people, to sponsor them from a place of authenticity when that time and that opportunity arises. And then the third thing I'll say, more on a corporate level, is really looking at supplier diversity, vendor diversity. How can you actively put your dollars where your mouth is, where your values are, and how you're supporting women, people of color, and those who are identifying as part of a marginalized community.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those pointers. Marie, you are wonderful. How do people get in contact with you, especially if someone wanted to come in and work with you one-on-one, bring you in to help them build a more inclusive organization at the company level? How do people get in touch?
Yeah, so the best way to reach out is just to go right to the website, mariedeveaux.com, and book a call. You can hop on a virtual chai or have a conversation about your individual needs or that of your organization, and that's really the best way to reach out to me.
Thank you again for joining us, and thank you for helping us learn how to be better humans at work.